Soyuz damages its launchpad, Starliner won't fly crew on its next flight, the European Space Agency's budget reaches a record high, and 2 Chinese reusable rockets are about to fly. We'll have all that and more coming up this week in Spaceflight. ESA was just allocated over 22 billion euros. That's over a third of NASA's budget. But what can they actually do with it? How will it help Europe gain space independence? And are they planning anything for reusability or even crew spacecraft? Well, Marty was on location for NSF to find out what they've got in store for the next few years.
I'm in Bremen in Germany, where a very important decision on the future of the European Space Agency has just been made. This is where the ministers responsible for spaceflight in ESA's member states met up for the Ministerial Council, a meeting where they negotiated how much money to allocate to ESA's programs. I spoke to the man in charge, ESA General Director Joseph Aschbacher, to discuss his plan, his ambitious plan to transform Europe's future in space. It is a 22 billion euro plan and he nearly got all of it. It seems that Europe is finally daring to dream big when it comes to spaceflight. And honestly, that is really exciting to see.
I wish that we would have this energy that we have today 10 years earlier. This is absolutely true. But it really is now a very important moment. We have a security situation that is unparalleled. We never had such a security threat in the East as we have it today with a war on our European continent. We are encouraged to reinforce our defense capabilities in defense, but also space and defense are tightly linked from the United States. And yes, we have to build up strength and autonomy. And that's exactly what I'm doing now through this proposal to make Europe stronger and therefore more autonomous, but also a strong partner for international cooperation. And yes, the timing now is actually extremely important, extremely good. I would say almost ideal, given all the geopolitical context that we have today in front of us.
It seems that Aschbacher's timing paid off. He came into this meeting with a very, very ambitious plan and walked out with a historic result. He pretty much got what he asked for, and that never happens. Last time, in 2022, ESA got 1.5 billion less than requested, ending up just shy of 17 billion euro. This time, they requested well over 5 billion more than allocated and got nearly all of it, only missing out on 150 million. Still, that doesn't mean that ESA can just go ahead with their plans, as there is some nuance in how the money is allocated to the programs. These nuances reveal what ESA's member states really want, and some of it's quite surprising. So let's take a look into the plans and see just how much spaceflight you can get for 22 billion. The largest chunk of the budget is dedicated to space transportation. Now, as you might imagine, this covers Europe's rockets and their launch infrastructure. It also includes the European Launcher Challenge, which is ESA's program for developing commercial rockets. There are currently 5 companies contracted under this program: ESAR Aerospace, Maya Space, Orbex, PLD Space, and Rocket Factory Augsburg.
We also have what we have at this ministerial on the table, rockets that will be supported through the European Launcher Challenge. They do not yet fly. One of them had an attempt earlier this year. There are 5 candidates that we are offering to support, and those 5 launchers, they all are having a concept of reusability as a major driver in order to reduce costs and therefore be very competitive. So yes, reusability is extremely important, and we as ESA will act as an anchor customer. We will buy a launch service from these private companies that will be built up, and we will support them through the next couple of years.
Apparently, this is what the member states want. ESA originally proposed to allocate 420 million to this program, but the ministers raised it to more than double, over 900 million. Now, ESA will have to come up with a way to spend that money on the European Launcher Challenge, so definitely keep an eye on Europe's rocket startups.
What I want to achieve as DG of European Space Agency is to have these launchers that they are competitively available on the market. There may be less in the future. I'm sure that this number of 5 might be changing in the future. What I want to have is to make sure that we help them, that they can develop a heavy lift launcher of the size of Ariane 6 in the years to come. Of course, this takes time. We know that and we assume that, but until then, we support Ariane 6 and Vega C to make sure that we have guaranteed access to space.
The second biggest item on the budget is science, and it got fully funded. That's no surprise, though, as it's actually mandatory for ESA member states to cover the science budget. But it's steadily increasing, and ESA has got some great missions coming up, including the largest ever X-ray telescope. ESA's next flagship science mission will visit Saturn's moon Enceladus to land on its south pole to search for traces of life. An ESA official familiar with the mission told us that it requires 150 square meters of solar panels to power the spacecraft that far from the sun, and they'll likely need to send up the spacecraft over multiple launches and assemble it in orbit before it can head to Saturn. Although the new budget doesn't approve the mission, it does allow ESA to get started on working out these concepts. Then there's Earth observation, the third largest item on the budget. It's already one of ESA's strong suits, with the Copernicus program, among other things, which is a collaboration between ESA and the European Union. But now, European politicians have asked ESA to develop a new program to leverage its space capabilities for defense purposes. And one big part of that is, of course, Earth observation. As you might imagine, this is a bit of a controversial shift for an agency that used to be completely civilian. This week, the member states changed the paradigm and officially mandated ESA to work on defense and security as well. Finally, we need to discuss the Human and Robotic Exploration Program, which includes the upcoming Argonaut robotic moonlander and, of course, the European astronauts. But will they ever fly on a European crew vehicle?
Today we have no program and no decision made that we will have a European human spaceflight program, just to be crystal clear. However, we are having building blocks that could work in this direction to prepare the ground for future investments. One is the LEO cargo return service vehicle. That means we, in competition, allow industry to provide an offer to us, and we will buy a service that they bring cargo from the surface to the space station, dock on the space station, unload the cargo, we expect about 4,000 kilos, and then return about 1,500 kilos down to the surface. That means re-enter through the atmosphere and land, which is a capability that we do not possess today in terms of technical expertise or technical capability. So yes, we are developing those.
Even if ESA isn't directly working on this capability, some European companies have shown off concepts for their own crew vehicles. ESA astronaut Luca Parmitano seems to like the idea.
I think it's about time, in general. A couple of years ago, I was with Josef, my Director General, at a conference talking about the fact that for too many years we haven't been able to see small companies coming up with great ideas, find financing, and bring their proposals. And I think that this is what's happening right now. On the other hand, it takes a lot of time to develop good systems, and that's where we come in with our expertise. I believe these companies have great ideas, great potential, but they really need to join up with those that have acquired the expertise through years of operations, and then the combination of the private sector, these young industries that want to bring innovation, and our experience, then we can get great results.
However, these concepts will only get off the ground if there's a political demand for this capability, and that's where some of these nuances that we discussed earlier come in. The Human and Robotic Exploration Program didn't get the funding that ESA requested. In fact, it got nearly $800 million less than ESA wanted. Now, Aschbacher's proposal didn't include crew capability, and they might still find a way, but this result clearly shows that human exploration isn't currently a big priority for the politicians. But I should mention that the program still got a 10% budget increase compared to 2022, just not as much as ESA hoped, so human spaceflight isn't going anywhere soon. Other than space, of course. More details about the budget have yet to be released, and ESA now just has to figure out how to accommodate the wishes of its member states. All in all, the results of this week's Ministerial Council show that priorities are shifting and that Europe is demanding the competitive space sector that we've all been hoping for. It really promises an exciting future for European space fans. If you want to see how it all plays out, tune into future episodes. Like and subscribe to our channel to make sure that you won't miss it. It's a great way to stay up to date with space programs around the world. NASA and Boeing have confirmed that the next Starliner mission, Starliner 1, will now be used to deliver cargo to the International Space Station and will not be carrying crew. NASA awarded a commercial crew transportation capability contract to Boeing just over 9 years ago in 2014. This contract covered up to 6 crewed flights to the orbiting outpost following certification. This and the other commercial crew contract awarded to SpaceX were designed to give NASA redundant access to orbit through 2 crew capsules built using dissimilar architectures. years. In the 5 years since SpaceX flew its first crewed mission, Demo 2, the company has launched 16 crewed missions. These include 11 NASA missions to the ISS and 5 private missions, 3 for Axiom Space and 2 commanded by the candidate for NASA Administrator, Jared Isaacman. Inspiration 4 was the first orbital spaceflight with only private citizens aboard, while Polaris Dawn featured the first commercial spacewalk. Starliner, however, hasn't had such a smooth journey to date, encountering numerous delays, technical issues, and just one crewed flight test last June. The vehicle's maiden flight even failed to reach the station in 2019 due to software issues that consumed too much propellant, requiring a second uncrewed test flight in 2022. That flight did make it to the station, but experienced thruster dropout issues. And its most recent mission certainly didn't add to Starliner's less than stellar reputation. As you'll remember, additional thruster failures and multiple helium leaks resulted in NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams catching a different ride home aboard a Crew Dragon. Because Starliner's service module is jettisoned before re-entry and burns up in the atmosphere, engineers lose the ability to physically inspect any faulty hardware, making it harder to identify root causes and certify fixes. After a period of evaluation, NASA and Boeing have now mutually agreed to modify the contract, adjusting it to 4 missions, with 2 more available as options. The ISS is due to be deorbited around 2030, so even 4 missions could be optimistic, and needless to say, relies on things going really well on Starliner's next flight. The station has limited ports and an already busy manifest, with visits scheduled from Crew and Cargo Dragons, as well as additional deliveries via Cygnus, Progress, and new HTV-X, and maybe even Dream Chaser. Starliner needs to be able to fit into this busy timeline, so we might be lucky to see even half this number of flights. Time will tell, but we are certainly hoping that Starliner can turn a corner and finally deliver on the reliability and the redundancy that NASA originally intended. Now we'll take a look at a mission that might have wreaked havoc on the Soyuz launchpad at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. The Soyuz MS-28 mission started off like normal, sending a crew of 3 on their way to the International Space Station on November 27th. The commander on this mission was Roscosmos cosmonaut Sergei Kudzverchkov, who flew into space for the second time. He was joined by fellow cosmonaut Sergei Mikheyev and NASA astronaut Christopher Williams, both on their first flight. As is usual for these Soyuz missions, the crew arrived at the station after completing 2 orbits, docking at 12:34 UTC. They're now expected to stay at the ISS for 8 months. But although the crew made it safely to the ISS, the launch itself might not have been as perfect as it looked. From aerial footage shown near the end of the official broadcast, it seems that part of the launch pad collapsed into the flame trench. It appears to be the launch pad's service cabin, a multi-story structure that sits under the rocket before liftoff, allowing engineers access to the engines and other systems on the rocket's aft end. The whole thing is supposed to move out of the way to protect it from the flames coming out of the engines, but it should move to a special cavity, not to the bottom of the flame trench. Now that's pretty much all we know about this at the moment. Roscosmos acknowledged the issue on its Telegram account, stating that several launch pad components have been damaged and can be repaired with spare components. But can they? This isn't a component that they just have lying around on a shelf somewhere, though they might be able to find parts on an old launch pad, such as Baikonur's original launch pad, nicknamed Gagarin Start. This pad saw its last launch in 2019 and is now decommissioned, but maybe it could donate some components to a launch pad in need. Hopefully they can fix it soon, as this is the only launch pad that Soyuz can use to fly to the ISS. Without Soyuz, the Russians won't be able to launch Crew or their Progress resupply craft, which doesn't just help the astronauts stock up, but also provides propellants for the ISS thrusters and frequently gives the station a boost. The next Progress mission is scheduled for the second half of December. Hopefully, they'll be able to get it fixed by then, or else the space station's visiting vehicle schedule is gonna get messy. Again. Now we'll take a look at some other stories across space, starting with NASA's Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope, which is just taking critical steps toward launch after passing a major set of design and systems reviews. In recent weeks, the inner portion of the telescope spent 65 days in a thermal vacuum chamber to prove that it'll function correctly in space. Meanwhile, the outer portion completed 2 of its most demanding environmental tests, a violent shake and a powerful acoustic blast. These simulated the vibration, roar, and pressure waves that the telescope will experience during launch. Passing both means that the telescope's structure and instruments can survive the journey to orbit without its optics or electronics being compromised. When it flies, Roman will pair Hubble-class sharpness with a field of view that's 100 times larger, allowing it to map the universe with unprecedented speed. Roman is shaping up to be one of NASA's most powerful observatories yet. It'll hunt for thousands of exoplanets using microlensing, map how galaxies cluster to probe the effects of dark energy, and hopefully uncover billions of previously unseen galaxies. With these milestones behind it, NASA now considers Roman's flight design fully validated, clearing the way for final assembly, integration, and the last push towards launch, which is currently targeting mid to late 2028. Next, we go to the ZhuQue Satellite Launch Center in northwestern China, where we've seen 2 new rockets going vertical. Landspace's ZhuQue-3 has been spotted fully stacked on the pad, with air closures suggesting that we could see a launch in the coming days. The company performed 2 static fires on the vehicle's first stage this year, the second of which took place in October. Like Starship, the ZhuQue-3 is constructed of stainless steel, and its Tianche-12A engines burn liquid methane and oxygen, or methalox. The first stage is designed to be reusable up to 20 times, with landing legs and integrated grid fins. Landspace conducted vertical takeoff and landing tests with the ZhuQue-3 test article last year, and its predecessor, the ZhuQue-2, became the world's first methane-burning rocket to reach orbit almost 3 years ago. The initial vehicle for the maiden flight will be a little shorter than Falcon 9 at around 66 meters, but the full configuration will be another 10 meters taller at nearly 77 meters. The rocket is also wider than the Falcon 9 at 4.5 meters in diameter and aims to deliver a similar payload mass to orbit. Elsewhere at the same launch center, we've spotted another partially reusable Methalox rocket, which has also gone vertical. This is the first time that we've seen a Changzheng 12A in its full configuration following the arrival of its transport erector at the start of the month. Unlike the Changzheng 12, which has flown 3 times since last year, the 12A is the reusable variant. This rocket swaps liquid kerosene with methane for 7 Longyun engines on a first stage, adding 4 landing legs and grid fins for propulsive landings. This is the state-owned answer to private Falcon 9 style vehicles such as the ZhuQue-3 and the Tianlong 3. It stands just a meter under Falcon 9 with a slightly wider diameter. The Shanghai Academy of Spaceflight Technology, which built the vehicle, has already conducted a couple of successful vertical takeoff and landing tests. The most recent test in January flew to around 75 kilometers, though the Academy was tight-lipped about the final engine burn and splashdown. With limited information throughout the vehicle's development, and the Tianlong 3 also seen vertical last week, we'll be keeping a close eye on China in the coming weeks. These 3 partially reusable rockets are inching ever closer to maiden launches, which we may see before the end of the year. And if you don't want to miss updates on international launches, keep an eye on nasaspaceflight.com and keep up to date with the schedule on our next Spaceflight app and website. It's a great way to stay up to date, and it's completely free. Elsewhere in Europe, Scottish launch provider Orbex shared a new image of hardware for its Prime vehicle, which it plans to launch next year from the Saxavord spaceport. Prime is a 2-stage small-sat launcher that stands around 19 meters tall. For comparison, that's a fraction taller and wider than Electron. The rocket uses renewable biopropane for propellant and single-piece 3D printed engines using the largest high-precision metal 3D printer in Europe. The company shared a short video last week showing the successful static fire of these 3D printed engines, a key milestone as Prime moves through its test program. Orbex recently completed a full end-to-end launch simulation, successfully rehearsing the systems and procedures of launch day. Key components responsible for every phase of the launch were tested, from fueling and pressurization sequences to countdown procedures and ground system checks. The simulation didn't involve a rocket on the pad, but it was a key step towards validating Prime's mission-critical systems. Orbex is one of 5 European companies selected to potentially receive further support through the European Space Agency's Boost program. The agency's European Launcher Challenge initiative is designed to accelerate commercial access to space across the continent, advancing companies such as Orbex towards their maiden launch. With engine tests and a successful launch simulation behind them, we'll be keeping a close eye on Prime as it edges closer to the launch pad. A new 4-person crew has begun NASA's second Crew Health and Performance Exploration Analog, or CHAPEA mission. 4 volunteers will spend 378 days in the agency's simulated Mars habitat at the Johnson Space Center. The crew entered the sealed 3D printed habitat, where they'll live and work until next October. There, they'll face the same challenges that astronauts will encounter on Mars, such as limited resources, isolation, and 22-minute communication delays. During their time, they'll grow crops and take simulated Mars walks. NASA says says that the data from the ZhuQue mission will directly inform real mission planning, habitat design, and astronaut health strategies for future human missions to the Moon and Mars. And on the subject of Mars, you may remember the pair of ESCAPADE spacecraft that recently launched aboard New Glenn's second flight. Well, they've already captured their first selfies. Just 8 days after their launch, one of the two Escape and Plasma Acceleration and Dynamics explorers tested out its onboard cameras. The cameras checked out, and NASA received these two images showing part of the craft's solar panel. These validated the sensitivity of the visible light camera, which will image the Martian aurora from orbit once the spacecraft reach the red planet in late 2027. It also tested the infrared camera, which will later observe how the planet's surface warms under the sun and cools during the long night, and how those thermal cycles change throughout the seasons. NASA wrapped up its storm studying mission TROPICS this month, which is short for Time-Resolved Observations of Precipitation, Structure, and Storm Intensity with a Constellation of Smallsats. Phew, that is definitely one to abbreviate. The mission used 2 pairs of CubeSats, which were launched in May of 2023 aboard 2 Electron rockets. They've exceeded their roughly 2-year lifespan, and the final pair are now being powered down and deorbited. In that time, TROPICS has collected an unprecedented data set on hurricanes and tropical cyclones. The data includes observations on internal storm structures, such as rapid changes in rainfall and core dynamics that were previously impossible to monitor. With its mission complete, the data will now help scientists better understand how storms form and intensify, and improve extreme weather forecasting. Technology developed for the mission continues to fly aboard commercial weather satellites. NASA has finally shared pictures of the fully stacked SLS rocket that will send astronauts around the moon for the first time in decades. The agency stacked the Orion capsule on top of the rocket in mid-October, but we had to wait for the US government shutdown to resolve before we could see Artemis 2's SLS in all of its glory. And as NASA continues to gear up for the Artemis 2 mission early next year, even more hardware is being prepped and shipped for future missions. This week, the service module that will fly on the very first SLS Block 1B was completed by Airbus at its facilities in Bremen, Germany. The module will power the spacecraft for Artemis 4 and is now set sail across the Atlantic Ocean. Upon arrival at the Kennedy Space Center, it'll be tested and integrated with the Orion Crew Module and its distinctive X-wing solar arrays. Artemis 4 is also planned to deliver Europe's main living module to lunar orbit, known as Lunar IHAB. This will dock with other NASA modules to form the Lunar Gateway Station orbiting the moon. Meanwhile, the team at NASA's Stennis Space Center recently completed another test of a brand new RS-25 engine on the test stand. 4 of these engines power the SLS rocket, and Artemis missions 1 through 4 are flying repurposed Heritage Space Shuttle main engines. These high-performance engines were designed to be reused many times, but the core stage of SLS is expendable, so NASA has a limited stockpile of flight-worthy engines. To address this, Aerojet Rocketdyne was contracted to restart RS-25 production using modern manufacturing techniques, including 3D printing. This was the second flight-ready engine to be built and was fired for 500 seconds, the full duration of a launch. It's due to fly on Artemis 5, which will be the first mission to use entirely new RS-25 engines. And you know, this really is such a legendary engine. Wouldn't it be cool to have it on a shirt? Like this one? Well, we've got you covered on shop.nasaspaceflight.com. As part of our Cyber Week sale, you can shop with 20% off on some of our legacy collections, including the Thrust collection, which features that very shirt. So if you've been waiting to get a print or pick up some shirts or just stock up on gifts, now is the best time to do so. Be sure to head over to shop.nasaspaceflight.com before the Cyber Week sale ends on December 1st. We had launches from all around the world this week, starting off with a pair of Starlink missions from the US, one from each coast. The one from California flew on a brand new booster, which also happened to be the 100th booster in the Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy family, depending on how you count and whether you include test articles that were never meant to fly. We also had 2 crew capsules launched this week, though notably only one of them carried crew. That was, of course, the Soyuz mission that we discussed earlier, and the other crew spacecraft launch was China's Shenzhou-22 mission to the Tiangong space station. It was the second Shenzhou launch in a month, and the first since Shenzhou-8 in 2011 to launch without crew. But that's because this launch wasn't originally planned. You may recall that China had to move some spacecraft around after a piece of space debris struck and cracked the outer layer of one of the porthole windows on the Shenzhou-20 capsule. This whole process left the current Tiangong crew without a return vehicle, and to rectify that, China launched the Shenzhou-22 mission empty on November 14th. The spacecraft arrived at the station a few hours later, and it will now stay there until the Shenzhou 21 crew's return, currently scheduled for May of 2026. In addition to the aforementioned Soyuz, Russia also launched some classified military satellites on its Angara 1.2 rocket. We also had a rare launch from South Korea this week, where a Nuri rocket took to the skies above the Naro Space Center to loft a technology verification satellite for the Korea Aerospace Administration, or KASA, as well as 12 CubeSat rideshare payloads for various universities, institutes, and companies. And speaking of rideshare missions, to close out the week, SpaceX finally got to launch its Transporter 15 rideshare mission on November 28th. The rocket lifted off from California to deliver 140 satellites for different customers and operators into a sun-synchronous orbit. Next week, we'll have the launch of the last Vega C mission of the year, currently scheduled to lift off from French Guiana on December 1st. The mission will launch a lightweight Earth observation satellite called COMPSAT-7 for the Korea Aerospace Research Institute. Rocket Lab plans to launch its Electron rocket from New Zealand later in the week on a mission called Raise and Shine, in a nod to the payload Raise 4, which is a Japanese satellite to test and demonstrate components and equipment in orbit. Of course, SpaceX will also be trying to get some Starlink missions in, with 4 currently on the schedule, 2 from each coast, using all of the company's Falcon 9 launch pads. As mentioned earlier, we might also see 2 inaugural flights of reusable rockets from China. In fact, the window for ZhuQue-3 opens only a few hours after this episode goes live. Keep an eye on our next Spaceflight app and website to stay up to date on the latest schedule changes. And that's your weekly update of Spaceflight news. I'm Alicia Siegel for NSF, and we'll see you all again next week to recap this week in Spaceflight.